stuff. There we
Oh,
go.
it's live.
There we go. It just wasn't happy that first time around. And it looks like we are officially live. And it's so funny to see. I don't know if people can hear us yet, but it's funny to see these different places. Weirdly, there's somebody here from Belfast, Maine, and I don't know how much you know about Samuel de Champlain, but I'm reading David Hackett. Well, I'm reading David Hackett Fisher's biography of him, and darned if the French don't end up in Belfast for a while, which just kills me because that's where my dad used to take me to Belfast, Maine, and it's so funny to realize that there's these layers of history, both personal and long term, in places like that. I can still see Belfast, Maine in 1976 in my mind, and I suspect it's changed a little since then. Anyway, hi everybody. Good morning.
Hello.
And Joanne and I are here. We've been up for hours. We went for a run. We eat a healthy breakfast.
Yeah, the thing is, I can believe that of you. It's not of me.
I did not go for a run this morning. Good morning, Joanne. How are you?
Good morning. I am good.
So I assume that you are running your little hiney off on television talking about violence. Would that be correct?
That is correct. I always know when something bad happens in the United States, because then I suddenly get 800 emails by people who want to talk about violence. So yes.
So, I mean, it's the obvious thing for us to talk about today, but I do have sympathy for you on that front. And you and I have talked a lot about that. And I wonder if we can take it in a little bit of a different direction today, because what interests me in this moment is, first of all, how instantly accusations that the person who murdered right-wing activist Charlie Kirk in Utah on Wednesday was somebody on, and I quote, the left, and then how quickly those accusations plummeted when it turned out, in fact, the shooter appears to have been a 22-year-old white Mormon reared in a Republican gun loving household. And I'm interested in the public reactions to what happened. And the reason that I'm interested in is because the obvious comparison is to the 1850s, your period. And at that period, those people that were trying to really rile up violence against the North in the United States really did dominate the public conversation, and you couldn't push back because they silenced the newspapers, they silenced the politicians, they made it so that there was this bubble that people couldn't get out of. And what do you think? Do you think the fact that we are in a different information age when people can push back instantly changes this trajectory that we saw in the 1850s?
It's really interesting. I mean, before I get to the actual answer to that, what struck me in the way that you just described it is another thing that happened in the 1850s. I remember seeing the letters of like notable people in the 1850s who said they were afraid to say anything, because in the North, they were afraid to say anything because someone would come down on them. And this is before the technology. They were just like, if I say anything, if I come forward, if I write something, if I say anything publicly, I'm going to be in trouble. So I'm not going to say anything, which is, of course, the moment we're in now. And as you just suggested, technology, for better and more often, it seems worse, is making it so that, number one, anything that you say is instantly spread everywhere and exaggerated and escalated. And number two, even if you don't say it, it's edited or clipped or put out there. So technology is creating its own conversation, and I think is creating this climate where extremism seems like the norm, like in the 1850s. And because of that, if you're not extreme, you're afraid to speak out.
Well, except people are speaking out more than they could in the 1850s. That is, as you know, first of all, the thing that interested me about the sudden flood of information was that the Trump White House and the Trump administration has completely defunded the organizations in the government that are supposed to be protecting us against Russian disinformation, foreign disinformation, and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it did not feel organic to me, but I don't know. I mean, I don't do the tech stuff. I do think it's interesting that hasn't been part of our conversation. But people jumped pretty quickly to say, hang on just a minute here. We have no idea who did this. And if you look at the kind of language you are using, this is really dangerous for a democracy. And it just struck me that that was something you did not hear in South Carolina in 1858.
Well, that was for sure. You were not going to hear that in the South in 1858. But what I heard, at least, I obviously can't speak for you, but yesterday I did my podcast and I talked about not the shooting, not the murder, but the response to it. And I had people in a variety of different ways saying, don't speak about this because people are getting fired. Just don't talk about it.
Well, and that actually brings up that bigger piece that fascinates me in this moment. And that's the administration and the right wing is projecting power they do not have. And, this is what Timothy Snyder talked about and saying, don't obey in advance. The idea that that we are suddenly on the verge of civil war, which is something, by the way, that bots have been pushing now for more than a decade.
Yes.
Is just absolutely belied by the actual statistics of how many people think that political violence is the answer. It's
a shorthand. And if I could talk about that for 1 second, because that's a particular thing that drives me bonkers is, civil war, it's civil war. We're going to have civil war. What if it's civil war? That's a shorthand. That's just a buzzword. That's just a way, as we're suggesting here, to drum up emotion and violence. We had a civil war before the actual civil war that we had. Actually, we've had two, because people call the revolution a civil war too. But before the main one, people weren't running around saying, it's civil war. They were saying, oh, wow, this is scary. What should we do? I don't know. They weren't slamming on the gas and crying about civil warfare. That's what we're doing now. And that's why, to me, it feels more like an advertising campaign than anything else. It's a lazy way of forcing people to think along a line that, as you suggest, it's not where we are right now, but there are some people who sure would like us to think that.
Oh, that's really interesting that it's like an ad campaign. I have been suggesting to people that one of the ways to combat that is to take a deep breath and not react to something immediately. Is that, you think, the answer?
I think that's one answer. And I say that all the time. I've said that all over the place, that when you see something, and particularly like that, and you feel your emotions click in, pause for a moment and consider who wants those emotions out of you. Because you will find an answer most of the time, right? Oh, wait a minute. Am I being baited? So yeah, I do think that part of the answer, and it's sounds goofily simple, right? Like pause and breathe. But in this moment, in this climate, considering there are people who don't want us to do that, that's an act of protest, right? Pausing and breathing.
So that raises a question, though. If the formulation of civil war, which, as I say, has been being pushed by bots and by trolls on the internet for more than a decade already, is a form of controlling the way people think so that they go down that path. How do you combat that with a different path? By really highlighting the importance of democratic norms?
That's a good question. I think we're going to have to figure that one out together.
Well, that's why we're here, Joanne.
I know.
Instead of going for a run.
I will never go for a run, Heather. Never going to happen. I can promise you. Maybe a walk. How do you combat that? Well, I mean, actually, part of an answer is something that I know you talk about a lot and that I talk about a lot. And that is reminding people of the we, of the us, of the fact that there is a majority of people who aren't traveling along that line. And saying that in a realistic, persuasive enough way that it rings true. If people open their eyes and look around to see who's around them and connect with their communities, they will very quickly see that the majority of people around them are not screaming civil war.
So yeah, I totally agree with that. And that brings up this weird moment where if you look at people like the alleged shooter in Utah, they are what people call extremely online. And what that means is this idea that your sense of reality is shaped by this weird online world, and you lose track of what's happening in the real world. But actually, it seems to me that communities in a way have always done that, that extreme
Mhm.
communities have always done that.
Mhm.
And the trick is how you I mean, I think one of the issues now, of course, is that it is possible for people in those communities to get weapons that can hurt people outside them. But how do you combat that as a society? You hear a lot about the rebuilding of, community groups, which doesn't necessarily mean, the agricultural group. It could just mean you get together with your friends over a book or whatever. But I do think it's interesting that people are acting as if this is new, and yet again, I look at the American South after, let's say, 1850, and man, it was groupthink. And honestly, I think that probably the same could be said for a number of communities, real life communities right now in certain parts of the country.
Right. Well, and I go back further in time, but I hate Freemasons. Freemasons are horrible. I will only see the danger of, or the Illuminati. It's the Illuminati. We only see the threat of the Illuminati. I mean, you can go through American history and see groups of people picking and then only seeing what they choose. But, perhaps that means part of the answer lies in the thing that's causing the threat, which is that technology, right? Because what the folks yelling about the Illuminati or yelling about the Freemasons or anybody else didn't have, that they had that bubble, but other people didn't necessarily have a way to pierce that. We do. The question is, what do we do and how do we do it? But the same thing that allows people to be in, you could say, a more powerful bubble, because if you're extremely online, it's everywhere. That's a tool that's sort of waiting for people to figure out how to use it to get in. I don't know the answer to that, but that seems like part of an answer.
Yeah. Would you agree with me that the answer is not to try to stop the technology? I mean, one of the things that kind of jumps out to me is the degree to which we're in a moment when a lot of people are like, we just have to shut all these people up. We just have to stop this. And I think of my, I don't know, great great grandfather who became estranged from his father because he insisted on going with those newfangled railroads and leaving his apprenticeship as a wheelwright. And his father thought he was completely ridiculous and throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and he would never go anywhere. And I just think, technology's here. We just got to figure out how to use it for
Exactly.
democratic purposes. Right?
Exactly. And I totally agree with you. And I also think that stopping or pretending like you can stop technology in and of itself is what do I want to call it? A repressive act that will have an impact. So I don't think it's possible. And I also don't think it's positive in any way. It's just, it's a version of shutting people down for what they say, right? It's a version of free speech being not freed, right? So I don't think stopping technology is the answer at all. I think it's more along the lines of what you just said. It's in finding a way to use it that isn't necessarily escalating things, that is, the tone of it is in a way that will pierce the screaming. I'm spouting off here things that I think are necessary. I don't necessarily know the way to do them, but I think that's where the answer lies. Not in silencing voices, but in having a different voice.
Well, now that's a good question, though, because one of the things that I wonder about, because I'm somebody who doesn't really do the kind of deep dives into technological statistics that one would need to do, is you hear so much about people who are extremely online in negative ways. There are also the ways in which people like you and me have managed to make connections over distance in entirely new ways that I've never once seen written up anywhere. Not that I'm urging people to do it, but you think of the huge numbers of people who get together for red wine and blue, or for, when you and I have a conversation or whatever. And sometimes I look at the numbers of the people who are radicalizing, and they're actually a lot smaller
They are.
than you and I come up with. And I wonder there too about whether people are getting a poor vision of what's really happening in this country. As a historian, I mean, what will we say about this moment?
Right, right. Well, and certainly along those lines, you can say that there's a really loud, really extreme, smaller group, and they're all about suggesting that they're a bigger group. That's their goal. That's what they do. That's what the screaming is about. That's what the Civil War is about. That's what it's all about, right? In a sense, when you boil it down, they're just about promoting their size. And that's because they don't have it. They don't have the power. They don't have the size.
That's so well put. That when you're screaming and when you are insisting you're bigger than you are and so on, and trying to dominate, it shows you don't have power, not that you do have power.
Right. Which is another one of those moments where you have to pause and breathe to think about it, because the emotional response to loud screaming, we're big, we're scary, we're coming for you, is to believe it and feel threatened. And if you have that moment of pausing and saying, wait, why are they saying this all the time, all over the place? If you really had that power, would you need to keep banging your chest to assert that you have that power? Not really. But it's hard. I mean, that plugs you into, fight or flight, right? That if that kind of emotional screaming gets to you in a certain kind of a way, it bypasses your ability to sit back and be rational and actually realize the logic of what we're saying here, which is powerful, but also hard to get to, which is the louder and scarier they are, probably the weaker they are.
So one of the ways I've been trying to formulate this is to think about the many ways in which Trump especially, but the MAGA movement is becoming, I'm going to put this badly because you've articulated this very well, that they are dangerous. They have the power of the federal government and they are hurting people with it. And that is 100% true. And it gets more true every day. And yet they are also badly divided. Their leader seems to be falling apart. He can't pay attention to anything. They are out of step with the vast majority of Americans. And there's a way in which you sort of feel like you should push them to the side and move forward without them. Creating new pathways. And
who's the them? What's the them that we're
the MAGA and the MAGA movement?
Yeah.
And I think of somebody like Abraham Lincoln, who, by 1859, he had pushed aside the debate about the extension of enslavement into the American West, really. Not that it went away, but he had sort of pushed it to the side and said, here's how we're going forward. And in that speech he gave at the Milwaukee Agricultural Fair, talking about this is what America truly stands for. We want to have a government that works for ordinary Americans. And here's what that looks like in these particular ways. And, I wonder if we're approaching a point like that with all the new voices we have saying, hey, wait a minute here. This is not what we want out of the country. This is what we want out of the country.
But to me, that's the important part of it is we shouldn't, or it feels to me that at the heart of what you're saying, and I agree with it, is that we shouldn't be talking back to the people who you're talking about pushing aside. We should be saying, here's the way forward, right? We have something to say. We're actually not going to engage in that conversation, which will just be promoting and enlarging that conversation. But over here, and I must have said we like 892 million times in the last 5 years, 10 years. But at any rate, what we don't see a lot of is here's the way forward. Here's where we can go. We are a big we. I know you say that a lot. I know I say that a lot, but I'm agreeing with what you're saying, is that engaging in what isn't a debate by talking to the people who are doing the screaming is just amplifying them. So it serves them. So offering something else, but doing it in a way that pierces through the screaming, I think is important.
So, and that brings us back to the media and the way they're portraying things, because in fact, there are a number of voices that have not only suggested new ways forward, they have done them. So the Democratic governor in New Mexico, Michelle Lujan Grisham, just made childcare free for everybody, which I cannot tell you what a game changer that is. And Maura Healey in Massachusetts, the governor of Massachusetts, has just figured out a way to cut through a bunch of red tape to create 222,000 new housing units in the next few years, because Massachusetts housing prices are just off the charts because there's too little housing. And you've got people who are, and JB Pritzker out in Illinois is doing.
I was about to say, yeah.
So, but it just doesn't get any traction because Trump is the reality show every freaking minute.
Right. No, it's true. You're coming up, you're bumping up against a howling reality show. A traffic crash that it's hard to turn away from. It's true. And because, oddly enough, the ways in which you actually can push back and make a difference are on a state level. And that's harder to get attention for that than screaming, howling things on a national level.
And yet, now I was thinking what other presidents used that. And of course, the obvious is Theodore Roosevelt and his bully pulpit, which a lot of people don't realize who are listening. By bully pulpit, he didn't mean he was bullying people. For something to be bully in the late 19th century was like great, big. It's bully.
Yeah.
And the bully pulpit was the best pulpit, the amazing pulpit he could use to make people turn toward the progressive era. And I think FDR did it too with his fireside chats.
Yes.
Certainly Gavin Newsom is trying to get attention. What's that?
Using technology in a new way. Fireside chats.
I saw something really interesting, I guess it was just this morning, about how few Democratic lawmakers go on podcasts compared to Republican lawmakers. It's really interesting.
That's
they're doing better. They're doing more than they did, but they're wonks. Their noses are to the grindstone trying to make stuff happen when in fact, I guess the way you sway people is to be out there in front of them.
Right. Well, to be louder than you are. Depends on how you're being loud, but in one way or another, part of the answer to the questions we're talking about here is finding ways to reach people and talking in a way that's looking ahead and offering alternatives versus screaming and pointing fingers, but it still requires people to adapt in a way that, you and I are here, but it took us a while to get here too, right? That a lot of people, they're not necessarily comfortable making that switch, and particularly people who are in positions of political leadership on the national stage really have to do this, have to be louder about this.
But I think that's actually a real issue, and I think you can think about it with our colleagues as well. Yes, you and I are in this world, but think of how many of us are not, and are not. It's not that they don't want to be, but it is a way of thinking. It's not like you can just say, "Oh, today." I mean, look at you and I. Every time we use a new technology, we push the wrong damn button, and we're, And one of the characteristics in this moment, I think, is so many of the people in the radical right have come up through that that field. And you look even now at the Trump White House, it is staffed with people who were Fox News Channel hosts. And the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, is basically running a reality TV show out of the White House, while the Democrats actually wanted to govern. So they spend a great deal. Well, but I mean that.
No, but you're right. You're right.
You've seen this. It's true. They read their briefing books and they argue about little tiny things that nobody is going to be listening to on TikTok.
Well, and related to that, they want to govern, and I can't speak for how many or who has this view. I can speak in the academic world, that people do. Not only do they not have time and don't want to do it, they scorn it. Right? Oh, well, that's just this social media, loud stuff, public stuff. Like, we've got other kinds of things to do. And of course you do. And of course you should do them. But I think there are still old school people who haven't quite gotten their minds around not just the power of this, but the importance of this and the ways in which it now, where we are, plugs into democracy, right? Technology always shapes democracy, always, because democracy is a conversation. And technology shapes the conversation.
You're killing me, Joanne, and you know why?
Why?
Because I want you to write that book.
You do. I know. I should get that's Heather's book expression on her face, like memorized.
That's right. Well, I will say, and I know we got to go because you've got a life, and I should have one. But I do think one of the things that interests me in the connection you just made is the degree to which I feel like my training in historical theory has been so much deeper since I started doing social media than it was beforehand, because you are constantly trying to dig deeper and dig deeper and dig deeper. And I think I was pretty well grounded in theory anyway, after all the training we've had. But man, the degree to which I am now reading stuff that I couldn't begin to make my way through in graduate school, and understanding now why it matters, because you can see in real time
That's
how
right.
it applies to the changes in society. And that's something that, people who
No, it's true.
denigrate the idea of showing up on Instagram
Right.
maybe should have a better view of, because
Absolutely.
it's, the rubber's meeting the road where we are.
Well, right now and today, there are two things I want to say before we sign off. I know we're like a minute or two even over where we'd like to be. The one thing that popped into my head a while ago, and I can't resist saying it. Was it your grandfather who started out? What was he doing before he went into the
He was
railroad?
apprenticed to be a wheelwright, make wagon wheels,
Right.
which is a very
Okay.
good job
Oh,
in
yeah. But that was your grandfather.
no, it was before that. It would have been my great-grandfather or
Perfect.
my great-great. Remember, we missed a generation because there was somebody who had a child in his 70s.
But anyway, better the great grandfather. So let's just say, for the purposes of right now, your great grandfather was a wheelwright. Mine was an egg candler. He checked the yolks in eggs before they could be sold. And when you said
Why?
wheelwright,
Why?
well, I guess if there was no yolk or a bad yolk, they wouldn't sell it. If there are
Okay.
extra yolks, he would bring them home.
Okay.
But it was just seeing us here talking in the way that we're talking and doing what we're doing and thinking about a wheelwright and an egg candler, just sort of struck me in the heart in a nice way. The other thing I wanted to mention is, and I don't want to advertise, but people have been asking in the chat, what's your podcast? Can I name that?
Oh, of course. No, of course.
It's called History Matters. It's actually called History Matters, and so does coffee, because it's in the morning. It's Friday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern time. And for the moment, ultimately, it's going to be based on my YouTube channel. And you can catch it there. I'm reposting it there. It's also at NCHE, National Council for History Education, teach.org/conversations. But if you go to my YouTube page, I repost all the episodes there, and it's live 10 a.m. Friday mornings.
Just a little correction. It's not a YouTube page, Joanne. It's a YouTube channel.
And that proves the point of our entire conversation.
And that's why I
Channel,
said exactly why I said
my
it.
YouTube channel. Yeah, I just making our conversation come true.
Which, by the way, is linked to this conversation. I don't know if people can pick it up or not.
Right. I feel like most people are probably not finding it, but it's there.
Okay. And somebody said they candled eggs to see if they were fertilized or not. If they were fertilized, you hatched them out. If they weren't, you ate them.
Thank you very much.
I wonder who figured that out.
I have lost my egg candler knowledge down the generations, but I'm just wheelwright, and egg candler just made me happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the world marches on. All right. We should go live our lives.
We should go live our lives. We will do this again, and maybe for all we know, it'll be another Saturday.
Yeah, I'm trying to write a damn book, so I'm around.
And I should be, apparently. So
yes. Yeah. Well, you know what? I'll keep putting pressure on you. Maybe we should do this and just we should just sit here and write.
Oh, that would be really exciting.
Really exciting. All right. Have a wonderful day, Joanne. Love you. Thanks for doing this.
Love you too.
Bye.
Bye.